Well, the best laid plans of mice. Hey everyone, Tabletop Bro here. I ran Dungeon World the other day for a couple friends of mine, and it actually went really well. We kicked off a brand new campaign, went a lot better than I expected. Not that I was expecting it to go bad, but you know how it is when you're a GM, you run a new campaign with new people, you never know how it's gonna go. There's always a little bit of anxiety in the air. So like every campaign that I start, we began in a cart. I love starting my campaigns off in a cart because it forces all of the player characters into kind of this close-knit proximity area where they have to RP. I mean, they don't have to, but you know, it'd be way cooler if they did. And in this case, they did. We got to meet our 4 heroes of this session. We had Dorwit, played by my buddy Ronald. I hopped on his channel a couple weeks ago. It's great, you should check it out. We had Milburn the Thief, played by noted viewer, and you know what, I would consider him a friend at this point, Andrew Garrett. We had Settler, played by one of Ronald's viewers and now one of my viewers, and I would also consider him a friend, Sean. And we had Castor, played by one of Ronald's viewers, but now one of my viewers, and I would also consider him a friend now, Avery. So we meet all of our heroes on this wagon. Now, the first thing they see on this wagon is that the air around them is incredibly dry. I mean, you would feel that, you wouldn't see that, but you get what I'm saying. They're in an incredibly dry climate. When they look to the left, they see nothing but just savanna, steppe. To the right, they see some dry, rocky mountains, sort of like what you'd see in Las Vegas or California. That's what's so great about starting in a cart. You can just really set up the landscape and kind of hint at what some future problems that they might be solving will be. I gave a chance for everyone in the party to introduce themselves, as you typically do. Everyone got to describe their character. Behind them, there was this entrepreneur who was going to the starting town that we had all kind of created called Boundary, and he was going to sell them some water along with some other provisions. There was also the wagon driver, who was another halfling. He had a very thick sort of southern slurry accent, probably coming from a low kind of southern background type of thing. And these two kind of were able to relay the situation to the players. Textbook starting and RPG stuff. Once I felt that momentum was beginning to slow down, everyone's like, okay, cool, what do we do now? That was when I pulled out my ace card. As the great Matt Colville, who I'm ripping this format off, says, Orcs Attack. Only in this case, it wasn't orcs. It was dragons. That's right, this is a level 1 party, but in the distance, on the steppes, they saw dragons. Now, of course, in the world, this is a totally normal thing for this area. The Blue Dragon Flight patrols this steppe land. This is their turf, if you will. The players didn't really know this. The characters didn't really know this because they've never been to this area before, and it totally worked. It freaked them the fuck out. They were like, oh my God, what's going on? Off in the distance, there are 3 dragons that are attacking something we can't see. This is a problem. Now, they were so caught up with the dragons to the north that they didn't even notice the Wyvern emerge from the south. That's right, the very first combat encounter of this campaign was against a Wyvern. Now, you'll notice something real quick. Those of you who are astute in Dungeon World, the Wyvern doesn't actually exist in the core Dungeon World rulebook. But on the DM sheet for Dungeon World, there's this great section on how to create monsters, and there are tons of resources online. Someone actually did create a Wyvern that has moves and stuff. I just pretty much ripped off of that. Anyway, I digress. Of course, as the Wyvern's approaching the players, they all think it's coming for them, so they all brace themselves. Settler takes his shield and, you know, maintains a defensive stance. He's a big stalwart orc paladin. Castor draws his sword, kind of does the same thing, is ready to go. But Milburn, tiny little halfling, jumps off the side of the wagon, hides underneath one of the wheels, totally fine. Dorwit, who's a wizard who doesn't know what the fuck is going on, is just like, what? The Wyvern doesn't attack the player card. The Wyvern does not give a shit about the players. The Wyvern attacks the water card. Why does the Wyvern attack the water card? Well, you'll have to find out. The first thing it does is it goes and it grabs one of the casks of water and just runs off with it. So the players are like, oh shit. And riding on the back of the Wyvern are 4 kobolds. Now the kobolds jump off of the Wyvern, and these are the things that engage the players. The Wyvern comes near, and immediately Dorwit casts fear on the Wyvern, and it is a success. So the Wyvern is now afraid of Dorwit. The Dungeon World rules are kind of broad with this. You can kind of play it however you see fit. I played it that it didn't want to go near it. Settler springs into action and just slices one of the kobolds in half. Milburn takes one of his daggers, just plunges in the kobold. Moral of the story is 3 of the kobolds fall to the party's hands, really quickly and easily. Kobolds have like no health, and the party was just dishing out the damage. But they still had to deal with the Wyverns. So Milburn runs off the cart, runs up the water cart, jumps up, and he does a Defy Danger roll. Now, Defy Danger is sort of your catch-all move for anything that's not explicitly stated in the other basic moves of Dungeon World. And I wanted him to roll for it because this is a situation where, look, we don't know what's gonna happen. The way that you make moves in Dungeon World, as they're called, is anytime no one at the table knows what's gonna happen next, you roll for it. He rolls his Defy Danger roll and gets a 7. Now, that means that he does have success, but at a cost. So he manages to jump off the water cart. He grabs hold of the Wyvern's claw, but in the process loses all of his stuff. He is barely hanging on. It's also kind of a comical scene as this Wyvern's flying around with a well-dressed halfling clinging to dear life from his claw. Now, while all of this is going on, the 4th kobold is stabbing the shit out of the water casks. They kind of forgot about the kobold, and the water is spilling out everywhere, which is very, very, very bad news for Boundary. The players don't know this yet. They're all focused on the Wyvern and Milburn, who is clinging to dear life from the Wyvern's claw. So with Milburn hanging for dear life from the dragon's claw, Settler takes his axe and does a volley roll. So Sean rolled the 2d6, added his dex, and he got a 10, which means that plan went off without a hitch. The axe sunk itself in the Wyvern's chest, taking the Wyvern down. The problem is the Wyvern's like 30 feet in the air, and Milburn is clinging on to dear life from the claw, and now the Wyvern is sinking because it is dead. Like, a little halfling's not gonna survive that fall. So Andrew thinks fast and manages to acrobatically launch himself off of the claw, rolls another Defy Danger, and actually gets a really good roll this time. I think he got like a 10 or 11, whatever, who cares? And manages to land in the arms of, I believe, Castor. They finally realize that the kobold is still there, stabbing the shit out of the water casks. They take care of it. So now our players are in the middle of basically the steppe with a broken water cart and a very, very unhappy halfling. And the halfling, whose name's Didier, by the way, they never asked, but that was his name. It was prepped. He's freaking the fuck out because all the water's gone, and Boundary desperately needs the water. As far as the characters knew, they were just called to Boundary for whatever purposes by their employer, the major company Arbery and Whitlock. They didn't know anything about the carriage. Even though the carriage is under the employment of Arbery and Whitlock, they weren't given a brief on it. But it turns out that Boundary's natural water source has run dry. These casks of water was meant to supply the village for like the next, week or 2 weeks. So I gave the players one last chance to just kind of explore the area that they're in a little bit, just in case they wanted to do anything else. One of the cool things about Dungeon World is you don't have to narrate every single scene. You can skip ahead. And I was fully preparing to skip ahead, but Dorwit wanted to go and see if there were any like wyvern eggs or dragon eggs hidden somewhere in the mountains. He did manage to find the wyvern's nest alongside Castor, who is kind of watching out for him, but he didn't really find anything in it. Castor found like some spoons and stuff like that. Now, normally that's, kind of a throwaway scene, but what it did was it enabled Ronald and Avery to develop bonds for their characters as they kind of realized their relationship dynamic. Dorwit is basically this confused old man, and Castor is kind of the one who's watching out for him. He's basically his caretaker. And they were able to make that bond right then and there. And so now in the future, if they do anything related to that bond, they'll both get experience points. So the players finally make it to Boundary and they meet their contact from Arbery and Whitlock in this very tiny little office, stone office with a thatch hut, super depressing inside. Guy's name is Kruger. Totally did not steal that name from Attack on Titan. Not at all. Don't know what you're talking about. So Kruger tells the party that obviously they very needed the water, but that is not why they are there. You see, the company has discovered through scouting expeditions that there is an artifact that will fix the water crisis in Boundary. And so he has tasked the players with retrieving the artifact. I hope my German accent wasn't too terrible. If you are from Germany and it was just really bad, I'm really sorry. So they do some negotiation with their contracts. Kruger lets them know they can stay in the inn for free. Cool, whatever. They go to the inn, they stay there. They get some cooking lessons from the innkeep. The inn's like a really depressing place. There's no water, of course. There's no alcohol, so no one's there. The innkeeper's kind of shocked to see the characters there to begin with. She can barely scrape together dinner for him, but they had a bunch of wyvern meat. So it was a really fun roleplay opportunity where Settler had a cook-off with the innkeep, and it was decided by a dice roll. It was fun. So the next day comes, comes and the party decides to set off for this ruin that supposedly has this artifact. When they got close to the ruin, they were ambushed by some dwarves working for ANW's biggest competitor, Muggsy and Sons. They had a brief standoff with Muggsy and Sons, but then Settler, the big-ass orc paladin played by Sean, decided that he was going to intimidate them. So he decided to roll using the parlay move. But he has a special move as an orc where instead of the charisma modifier for parlay, he can use, I believe, his strength modifier for it. Now, you might also be realizing orc isn't in the actual Dungeon World rulebook, but we managed to find a supplement online. We worked it out. It's totally cool. So he's totally successful with this move and intimidates the shit out of the dwarves. So successful that there was a conversation as to whether or not they should let the dwarves keep their stuff from their camp, but ultimately they decide, yeah, okay, whatever, they can keep their stuff, just scrap. With the dwarves dealt with, they finally arrive at this ruin and they step inside and immediately Milburn gets to doing his thief stuff, which is looking for traps. Of course, classic thief in an RPG. He manages to discover a trap at the front door, they manage to disarm it, cool, whatever. But in the next room, they discover there's a small band of orcs from the Lion's Tooth tribe. Now, this is not Settler's tribe. Settler goes through the door first, and they do some like orc bravado, and the leader of this orc warband challenges Settler to a duel. The orcs are there for pretty much the same purpose as the party, so they have a standoff. Now, of course, none of us know how the standoff is going to end. We would like Settler to win, of course, but ultimately we don't know what's going to happen. So hack and slash roll. Well, it turns out that Sean's dice were on fire that night because he rolls a 12 and he manages to just kill the orc in one blow. These were Orc Blood Warriors, which if you look at the bestiary section of the rulebook, they have really low health and he does a lot of damage. So he manages to cut them in two, and the rest of the orcs kind of realize, okay, cool, let's split. This is where a very important skill of Dungeon World comes into play. Because if you've noticed, there's no initiative in Dungeon World. Combat is done kind of on a conversational basis. So one of your roles as GM, you should have some level of social skills if you want to GM this game, basically. And you need to keep an eye on your players. Now, as I learned later, turns out he's just quiet. Sorry for putting you on blast. But a certain member of the party, who I will not mention, was, he's being rather quiet during the whole game, and I wanted to make sure that he was having a good time, so I wanted to give his character something to do. So his character, who's at the very back of the party, kind of gets some spidey senses and realizes that the orcs are breaking their oath and they're coming back. And so he gets a moment to kind of realize, it's like, oh shit. And he like preps and he manages to kill one of them, and then they realize, oh no, they've been double crossed. Now Settler does not take this kindly, and he turns around and he just goes ape shit. Like, just totally pissed, violating a blood oath like that's made challenged by combat. Like, you don't do that to orc kind. Now, a very important thing to note here, I didn't come up with that. Sean, Settler's player, came up with all of that. Something that's really important in Dungeon World, and I think just makes the experience so much better for everyone, including Sean, who said that he hasn't had this much fun playing a role-playing game in forever, is that you let the players make these kinds of decisions. Sean decided that orcs have this super warrior-like culture, and fuck it, why not? He's an orc, he would know these things. So Settler's pissed, and he just fucks up these orcs, along with Castor, who joins in on the battle. The two of them just go ham on this orc warband. So they take care of the orc warband. Settler is still fuming. And then they get to see what the orcs were looking at. Past the narrow hall, there was this small, tiny room. And as the players go to check it out, I think the first one was Dorwit, and he notices that the room is freezing cold. Like, the second he tries to set foot in the room, all heat just leaves his body. So Dorwit's a frail old man, and he's like, oh shit, okay. Later, bye. Settler doesn't give a shit. So Sean asked me if he can make some form of like a constitution save. His idea is that Settler is so pissed from the orc's betrayal that he doesn't even feel the cold. He's just so mad. Now, constitution saves aren't really anything that's in the Dungeon World rulebook, but fuck it, it sounded really freaking cool. I wanted to see what would happen, and no one, of course, knows what's gonna happen from that, so I let him do it, and he rolled successfully. So Settler walks into the frigid room that steals the heat right from your body, his own anger fueling him, and he walks right up to this sword that kind of looks like Frostmourne. It's basically Frostmourne minus the skull. The second Settler grabs the blade, the frigid Arctic effects expand beyond that room, and all of a sudden the players begin to feel all the heat being sucked out of their bodies. Settler starts going Nova, and that's where we ended the session. Of course, the players are like, what the fuck? But we had to end it right there. Ronald had an appointment to go to, and it really left him wanting more. We're gonna be playing again on the 29th. We're gonna pick up where we left off, see what happened. Other things happened in the dungeon when he grabbed that sword that they are going to find out about. If you enjoyed this type of video, please let me know in the comments so I know that it's actually worth making. And if you saw all this and you're like, wow, this Dungeon World game seems pretty cool, then click right here. I actually give you 3 rules that are in Dungeon World that you can apply to other RPGs. So if you still want to keep the gamification of maybe Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons, but you want to steal some of the rules from Dungeon World, that's the one to click on.